Hello and welcome to Mr. Manley History Teacher's latest video on how to answer the historic environment style question, which is part of the Elizabethan England AQA GCSE specification. In this video, we're going to start off by talking about some general advice and guidance on how to answer any historic environment style question. And then a bit later on in the video, we will be focusing specifically on the Sheffield Manor Lodge historic environment case study. So if you want to focus just on how to answer generic 16-mark Elizabethan England style questions, then the first part of this video will be designed for you. And if you're specifically watching this video for the Sheffield Manor Lodge style question, which will be coming up in the 2023 GCSE paper, then that will be coming up a little bit later on in the video. So let's start off by looking at the generic 16-mark question advice and guidance. So what does it say in the GCSE AQA history specification? So it says that 16-mark questions require you to produce an extended response. So students should demonstrate the ability to construct and develop a sustained line of reasoning which is coherent, relevant and structured, which means that within your answer you need to make sure there's a consistent line of argument and you're using paragraphs as well to organise and display your work. Now, in terms of the marks, it's broken into two assessment objectives. So assessment objective 1 is worth 8 marks. And for these marks, you need to demonstrate knowledge and understanding of the key features and characteristics of the period studied. So with the Sheffield Manor Lodge historic environment case study, you need to show specific understanding of Mary Queen of Scots' imprisonment in Sheffield Manor Lodge and also about what was happening at the time. Now, as well as this, you also need to show an awareness of the design and the building of Sheffield Manor Lodge to show the marker that you have a clear understanding about the historic environment itself. Secondly, assessment objective 2 is also worth 8 marks, and for this you need to be able to explain and analyse an historic event using second order concepts. And very shortly in this video I'll explain to you what those second order concepts are, and also if you're not sure what they mean, I'll explain to you what they mean as well. So as I mentioned already, AO1 and AO2 is predominantly based on knowledge and understanding of the historic environment that you're going to be looking at, and it needs to be not only the historic environment itself but also wider events and developments. And the best answers for this question have a consistent line of argument all the way through. And like I said, I'll mention these second order concepts a little bit later on. I can mention them now very briefly. So there are 4 main historical concepts that you could be asked about for this type of question. You'll only be asked one, but it could be either change, continuity, cause, or consequence. You'll only be asked one of those 4. So the question is intended to be an extended response which allows you, the student, to demonstrate your ability to construct and develop a sustained line of reasoning which is coherent, relevant and structured again. So how do we go about structuring a 16-mark historic environment answer? Well, first of all, you don't need an introduction. As you can see on this hierarchy triangular shaped diagram on the screen now, there's no introduction here, but what there are 3 triangles on the outer part of the shape, and they are our 3 factors. Now, one of the factors you'll be given within the question itself, a little bit like the other 16-mark questions you get asked in the AQA history papers. You're usually given a factor that you can write about in your answer, and that's similar for the Elizabeth historic environment question. So you'll be given a factor that you should look to write about in your answer, and the given factor on this triangular grid is an increased Catholic threat to Elizabeth. I haven't put the question for this specific grid on the screen because I want us just to focus on the structure rather than at the moment the Sheffield Manor Lodge type of question. We'll come on to that in a bit. But also you should look to mention, if you can, and timing is so important in this paper, like it is with all the history papers that you're asked in or you're given for your GCSE assessment. Timing is so important, and if you can, you should look to include 2 other factors, time permitted. But if you are running short of time, then what you should do is include 1 other factor in relation to the question and then go on to your conclusion. So that's what you should look to do if you are running out of time. But if you have the time, which is approximately 20 minutes to answer this question, then you should look to include 2 other factors before, and we can see in the middle of this diagram now, I'll just highlight that in a different colour for us. If you can, look to, we'll use a different pen as well. There we go. If you can, what we should look to do, is to make sure that you write a conclusion. If you're running out of time, that's the priority. So make sure that you write at least 1 paragraph on the factor mentioned in the question, 1 paragraph on another factor, so it could be, for the Sheffield Manor Lodge question, could be the location, comfort, its renovation for an anointed queen. And then if you're running out of time, go on to the conclusion. If not, if you do have the time, then try and include 2 other factors as well. So possibly the people involved. Bess, for example, you can mention in your Bess of Hardwick, you could mention in your answer as well. So the types of questions we could get. Now we're moving on to specifically Sheffield Manor Lodge, which is the historic environment in the 2023 Elizabethan England paper. So you could be asked a question about cause or causality. So potentially the reason why Mary was kept in Sheffield Manor Lodge, and you would need to be able to write a paragraph on reasons why Mary was put in Sheffield Manor Lodge. It could be a question on change, or the changing nature of the Catholic threat to Elizabeth after 1569. Obviously 1569, key date. The revolt of the Northern Earls took place that year, very soon after Mary had arrived in England. So what happened as a result of those changes and the way in which Mary was guarded? You could be asked a question on continuity, in which case you'd be thinking about similarities, things that stay the same over time. For example, maintaining Mary in a custom suited to her status, being an anointed Queen of Scotland. Finally, consequence. So what were the impacts on threats to Elizabeth and her government, and also the impacts on the lives of Shrewsbury and Bess of Hardwick as custodians as well, and even the impact on Mary Queen of Scots and her life having been moved to Sheffield Manor Lodge, the consequences of that. So you will be asked 1 question for the historic environment, which is based on just one of these 4 second order concepts: cause, change, continuity, or consequence. Let's now have a look at a couple of exemplar paragraphs that you might want to take pieces out of. You might want to look for evidence that you can potentially use in your Sheffield Manor Lodge answer. So let's have a look. So you might, for example, in your answer to the historic environment question, reference an increased Catholic threat to Elizabeth concerning both domestic plots and rebellions, but also the growing international threat from abroad, so from Spain predominantly, for example. So here's our exemplar paragraph. Mary Queen of Scots was the focus of Catholic plots from her arrival in England in May 1568. She posed a political problem for Elizabeth as her prisoner. Elizabeth severely punished those who threatened her in the Northern Earls Rebellion of 1569, but the papal bull of excommunication in February 1570 added another level of danger in the early 1570s. So here we're using really good specific contextual knowledge in our answer. And, you know, if we could read on a bit more, we've got more evidence here of further threats from abroad. In France, leaders of the French Protestants had been brutally murdered in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572. And most Protestants were starting to believe Mary was at the heart of an international Catholic conspiracy. And as a result, or as a consequence, Mary was moved to Sheffield Manor Lodge in November 1570. Now, it's really important in your answer as well to try and include information and knowledge on Sheffield Manor Lodge itself. If you don't do that, then it's going to be capping the maximum mark that you can achieve for this type of question. So, whilst Mary was being treated well as a house guest for this divinely appointed queen, the isolated location of Sheffield Manor Lodge was a change. Now, I would also stress as well, and this applies to people writing the historic environment answer in 2023, but also people that are writing any historical environment answers for future papers, that it's really important that you reference the second order concept in the question frequently throughout your answer. Markers will look to award really positively for you referencing the concept in the question. So if this was a question, if this was an answer for a question that was focusing on change, for example, referencing change in this paragraph would help get this person more marks. So that's something to be aware of. So from the Manor Lodge, there are panoramic views over the countryside. Sheffield had a population of about 1,500 people in Tudor times, and it is landlocked as well. It's away from ports to prevent any continental assistance for Mary. She was closely guarded. Frances Walsingham had placed spies in her household and also frequently questioned servants. She was allowed to go out on occasions, but these were escorted trips, and Shrewsbury had to submit a weekly written report to Walsingham about Mary's health, behaviour and security. Again, I can't emphasise enough how important it is to reference frequently throughout your answer the concept in the question. I hope you found this video really useful. Click on the like button and subscribe to my page, Mr. Manley History Teacher, if you haven't already.